Jackanoff and Pinker, not with Chomsky, Hauser, and Fitch, whose paper in Science was made quite a stir a few years ago. I was sort of involved in that process because Fitch was a friend and colleague of mine, and so were Mark Hauser, and we had this battle between a bunch of friends over how to treat that article. And I think that of the various theories that are out there, the idea that language grew out of a natural tendency to imitate and increased social complexity. I like Terry Deacon's theory. I don't think it's complete, and I don't think it's all right. Terry Deacon, if you want to read a really interesting, difficult book, read a book called The Symbolic Species by Terry Deacon, who's a neuroscientist and language expert, although he's not the linguist that somebody like Jackanoff is. And Terry, one of the main ideas in his book is that, yes, of course, there has been evolution of the brain for language. There is something a little bit like what Chomsky calls a language acquisition device, but language can evolve a lot faster than the brain can. And so if you want to understand the structure of language, you want to understand how language evolved to exploit the brain rather than the brain evolved to exploit language. Then you get co-evolution. So you think that language, many of the features of language are the way they are because that's what they had to do to sort of get into the brain and capture the brain. Now that's, in a way, a very much of a mimetic point of view. It's saying, if you really want to understand the structure of these viruses, you have to understand the home they got to live in. And the home they got to live in is a human brain. And yes, words, they're not simple. If you look at Jackanoff's book, Foundations of Language, you realize that words are extremely complex and sophisticated information structures. They're data structures of a very special sort. And they had to evolve. And they had to evolve to thrive and to beat out the competition in individual brains. So I think it's from reflections like this that we'll get a better handle on how language evolved in the first place. That was too long an answer. I'll try to be short.
More questions? More questions? Yes, way up there. Yeah.
Is it on?
Yeah, seems to be.
Okay. I really like that you are reviving mimetics, and I love the idea. But I'm a bit...
You should see all the arrows in my back and in the front. But I'm undaunted.
Yes. My question is that you're saying you're making a difference between bottom-up and top-down creation. But isn't what you're really saying that constructions that are made from genes are bottom-up, and then constructions that are made from memes are bottom-down? And is that really...
Well, yes and no. Let me thank you for asking the question, because it does allow me to say a little bit about what I was going to say about software and hardware. The initial construction, the initial design of memes, of words, let's say, is bottom-up. It's just as bottom-up as the termites' nest is. But once the system of language is installed in the brain. Now, the brain is a sort of computer, but it's a very special sort of computer. It's one which has a competitive architecture rather than a cooperative architecture. Competition is very much, I think, the order of the day. And so memes have to evolve to do well in these competitions. And what happens is they evolve to do well by joining forces, by having coalitions, by creating larger structures, which they're particularly well suited to participate in. And once they've done that, they create salient higher order entities, which then begin to do some serious work. As Doug Hofstadter says, who pushes whom around in the brain? The ideas begin, because of the way they are structured to interact and to feed on each other, to sort of form coalitions with others, this creates a new level of control. A level of control that no other animal has. And of course, the illusion is that it's the control of the self, you know, the one that's sitting in the Cartesian theater running the show. But of course, that self is itself a construction out of means. And jolly good thing too. It means that as you grow up and build your own self, or the self is built in you, and the words that you come in begin to get themselves said and heard, and pretty soon there's an author there. You watch a small child growing up and doesn't even know it's talking. It's the first. It's very much like the caddis larva when it starts its constructions, but it gradually grows into a foresightful, intending author. And that's when the fun starts. That's when a person starts. I'm afraid that's very metaphorical, but I can't do better without another hour and a half.
There is one down here, Karin. Yep.
I've been listening to your talk from a psychological perspective, and it seems like the concept of the unconscious is one that fits in with what you're talking about. And I was thinking, so much of what we do is we just do without really knowing why we do it. And I wondered if you thought about that, or if you have something to say.
Perhaps the most radical way of looking at your point is not, as it were, from a Freudian perspective, not that kind of unconscious, but from a cognitive science perspective, where our capacity to your capacity to parse the sentences you're hearing from me, and your capacity to frame the sentences, that you spoke to me, you don't have any access to how you do that. You just do it. And what we have to take from that familiar phenomenological fact is a somewhat unfamiliar lesson. Go back for a moment to Turing and the idea of Turing's strange inversion, where we have competence without comprehension. And Turing has this wonderful, he didn't articulate it particularly well himself. I think he thought it was too obvious to articulate. It's a sort of gradualism that works like this. You have your basic CPU. It sort of understands arithmetic. That's all. That's all it has to understand. Now you get your first level of software. It exploits the understanding of arithmetic to understand something more. Now you've got an operating system. Pretty soon you've got levels of software. And you write a Lisp compiler in C, and then you write programs in Lisp.